But nobody expected Ukraine to still be in the battle in the way that they are, or doing as well as they are, or for the Russians to be struggling militarily as they are. And the longer it's gone on, the more I think the Ukrainians, inspired by Zelensky, who's not a perfect individual by any means, he was a former TV producer, comedian, did Dancing with the Stars in Ukraine, and suddenly he's propelled into becoming a wartime president. And reminded me a little bit of Winston Churchill in that sense, where Churchill was a bit of a joke before World War II. Denounced by his party, flip-flop between parties. No one really took him seriously. And then when confronted with the biggest challenge of his lifetime, he rose to that challenge magnificently. That's the way I see Zelensky.
So I was watching this video yesterday when it came out, and I thought it was good. I thought Piers had a lot of really good takes. But he said something that really upset me and made me want to make this video, and that was that if you kind of don't agree with his position, and his position is binary, like you're either with Ukraine or you're against Ukraine, and if you don't agree with his position, then you're a coward.
Once you blink on this, and I think it's a really fundamental point, it is basically a form of cowardice to say, if somebody threatens to do something, the school bully threatens to punch you in the face, right, and you have the ability to defend yourself, you've got the same weapons that he has. If you allow that bully to win and you back off because you're worried about what he may do to you, everybody loses. And America loses big time. And China looks at it and goes, okay, now we go into Taiwan.
I'm not really a fan of this type of forum where you play a video and then you respond to every single sentence. I hope to represent Piers in a fair way on this video. But there's just a bunch of things that he said. And then later on, when he's talking about COVID, he talks about how there's nuanced perspective and how he regrets having the binary perspective while he's presenting the binary perspective on Ukraine, which is relevant at the moment. So that's why I made this video, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope I represent Piers in a fair way, but I just really disagree with a lot of the points that he makes here. So let's jump into it.
The question then becomes, why should America keep investing the money? Well, the alternative is you let Putin win. Win being he takes the existing Crimea, which he took in 2014, takes large swathes of the Donbass, and he just takes the land he wants. If that happens, he won't stop there. I'm absolutely certain of it. He didn't stop after Crimea. Why would he stop if he wins another chunk of land of Ukraine? But secondly, when did Americans, and particularly Republicans, when did they actually think it was a good thing that a dictator like Vladimir Putin invaded a democratic country in this way with such impunity and such a barbaric way, attacking maternity hospitals and so on, and just thought, actually, that's not our concern?
So first things first, the reason that this first point bothers me is because it's completely bad faith for the opposing opinion. Piers is stating that his opponents, intellectual opponents, are saying that it's a good thing that Ukraine has been invaded by Russia, and nobody in the world thinks that that's a good thing. If you don't want to send aid to Russia, you don't think that it's a good thing that it was invaded. You just don't think that it's a good thing for your interest to be supporting Ukraine at this time. And so he immediately villainizes the opposing position. He also then says, when has America ever had a policy of isolationism? And that's always been a thing for American politics. That's been a very prevalent, very strong foreign policy, populist position throughout the history of the United States. And I just don't think that he represents the opposing side fairly. And this is a good way to approach the start of this conversation, because we immediately discover that he's not giving the respect that is due to intellectual opponents when he says that you're saying it's a good thing for Russia to invade Ukraine, and nobody's saying that.
But the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, they were not a NATO country, and America was right in there with storming Norman, leading the way to kick him out and restore the sovereignty of Kuwait. And I don't remember many Republicans saying that was a terrible thing to do. In fact, quite the opposite. They thought it was a great thing to do, and there was great American pride in the military operation to kick Saddam out of Kuwait. The only difference between that and Ukraine is that A, it's more important, Ukraine, strategically and geographically, I think. And secondly, Vladimir Putin has nuclear weapons.
Well, it's that second factor that I think is leading a lot of people to take pause.
Ben is exactly right. That is the entire equation here. Nuclear weapons versus nuclear weapons. If they didn't have if Russia didn't have nuclear weapons, we would have American boots on the ground in Ukraine today. We would have had it a year ago. But there are nuclear weapons in the equation, and when you're talking about 80 to 60% of the population of the world being killed in nuclear winter, that's a different equation than protecting how many million people in Ukraine. You know, and they're very similar in culture to the Russians, and it just doesn't. The math is not there from the side of unlimited support without thinking about the consequences of support.
Why should the Americans encourage Ukraine to give up an inch?
To avoid the worst scenario, which would be the use of a tactical nuclear weapon.
What would you feel if Vladimir Putin threatened American mainland with nuclear weapons?
Believe me, on an emotional level, I totally understand where Ukrainians are coming from, and I'm rooting for
what would you feel then? What would all the American peaceniks at the moment? They want to give up the land.
The United States has already been threatened multiple times by Vladimir Putin with nuclear weapons. The entire point of us giving aid to Ukraine is that they are unsustainable without us, and so we have the right to dictate that aid. Okay, and so you can say, let's give an off-ramp to the fighting and have a resolution through concessions, and that would be totally acceptable morally, because they can't exist without us. Without our aid, there's no Ukraine. And so saying or asking them to negotiate for peace is not intolerable. That is not immoral. That is a completely sound proposition to ask for. We're at risk by giving them aid. Russia's at serious risk too. So there's a high risk factor on both sides, which is where it gets scary. It's like when you have high risk factors when you're dealing with two nuclear powers, that's not a good thing.
When did a nuclear deterrent become something that a dictator could use as a stick to threaten?
Well, I mean, throughout the entire Cold War. I mean, the entire Cold War, the United States didn't abolish the wall specifically because of that, right?
Why would he launch a nuclear strike?
Well,
knowing it would lead to his immediate evisceration.
If he believes that the alternative is his immediate evisceration, meaning that if he's pushed all the way to the wall, the theory goes.
You think Russian generals would go along with that, knowing that them and all their families immediately die?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that it's worth the bet. Right, that's the question.
Then he
for
wins.
America.
Then psychologically, he wins, and he wins big.
I don't understand this argument that people make on the internet and that Piers is making right now, that if you go along with the thinking that Vladimir Putin wants you to think, that he wins big. The fact is that there is a reality in that bad people can use reality to do bad things. That's a situation that we find ourselves in now. Vladimir Putin has nuclear weapons, and he wants us to think about them, but we'd be very stupid if we weren't thinking about them. I also think it's interesting that this argument that Vladimir Putin would never use nuclear weapons, the people that say that are the same people that claimed a year back that he blew up his own natural gas pipeline for some reason. After Germany got a new pipeline, the next day his pipeline was gone, and that he wanted to hurt his own citizens, or that he wanted to look like he was a victim. And people are saying, oh, he'll do anything. But then at the same time, they say, oh, he'll never use nuclear weapons. And that is not a sound, logical thought process. And I just have a serious problem with it, and that's something that's being displayed here. I imagine that Piers was one of the people that put some effort into, or some light on the theory that Vladimir Putin blew up his own pipeline. But he's also the type of person to say that Vladimir Putin would never use nuclear weapons. It doesn't matter what his generals say. If they're going to be killed for not going along with his orders, they're going to do whatever. And I don't understand how people could say that he values the world or Russia when they also say he's a very materialist guy. If you're on the way out, you're on the way out. And if you're the devil and you're on the way out, you do anything to keep your power. And so I don't understand the position that Vladimir Putin is the devil, but he won't use nuclear weapons. Also, he'll do anything in the world, including blow up his own pipeline. Those three ideas are inconsistent, and you can't hold them at the same time. It's not possible.
And then also,
does he though? I mean, if he loses 200,000 troops in Ukraine,
hang on. Here's
which is what he will lose.
Right, but China look at that, and they've got nuclear weapons, and they go, oh, okay, so all you got to do is threaten to use nuclear weapons, and the Americans back off. The world's biggest superpower with the biggest military will not engage if you threaten them with nuclear weapons. And everyone's got a weapon as a deterrent, turns around and goes, actually, we're going to use them. So what are you going to do about it?
The entire reason to have nuclear weapons is so that they can be used. If you had nuclear weapons but you couldn't use them, then they wouldn't be worth anything. So the threat of use of nuclear force is the entire purpose for nuclear weapons. That's why North Korea wants them, so that they don't have to negotiate with us. That's why Russia has them. That's why China has them. It's so that we can't invade them and we can't go to war with them. It's exactly what Piers is describing as not existing. That's the entire purpose for nuclear weapons. They are meant to be used by bad people, and the good people have to have them so that the bad people don't use them. And the whole point of our entire situation in Ukraine is that we're not backing down. I don't think anybody wants us to just roll over for Russia, but you can have a nuanced perspective where you limit the aid you give, like say, don't give tanks, but give unlimited missiles, give unlimited Bradleys, give unlimited APCs. I think that that's a fair position to hold, but Piers is making it so that it's a binary. The reason we're not backing down to Russia, and that's a thing that China sees. And China is freaked out about the support we're giving to Ukraine. I'm all about that. I think that it's fair to give Ukraine aid. I think that that serves a large purpose for our foreign policy. It serves it with China. It serves it with Russia. Russia's a lot less scary now, militarily speaking, because of our support for Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that you should ignore the nuclear threat.
Every American I know, if I said to them, Vladimir Putin invades any part of the United States and takes an inch of territory and claims it as his own, every American, to a man and woman that I know, would say, absolutely not in a million years, I'd rather die.
I really dislike this equivalence. United States is not Ukraine. We, as United States citizens, have the ability to oversee our government. We elect officials. We can't do that in Ukraine. We've taken steps to not be invaded by foreign enemies. Ukraine obviously didn't take sufficient steps to not be invaded. And it's not equivalent to compare invasion of the United States to an invasion of a foreign country. I understand that these are people that have value, and I value them, but that's not to say that I value them as much as I value my family. That's not to say that I value Ukraine as much as I value the United States. The United States is in a position of strength because its people put it there, and Ukraine unfortunately wasn't strong enough based off of its people. And a greater deal is that, or a greater problem in my mind, is that we don't even have congressional oversight of the funds that we're sending them. And we're sending billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to the most corrupt country in the world by like number 6 or something like that. And we can't even review where the money's going. The Ukrainians have already admitted that the money's going to the wrong places when Zelensky fired a bunch of people for corruption in the middle of the war after we'd already sent them like $100 billion. And I'm happy for that. But at the same time, we should be able to review this money. We should be able to review this aid and have a foreigner like Piers Morgan tell me that I'm not patriotic because I won't support Ukraine. That really upsets me. And I think that that's a disgusting thing to say. And I've noticed that Piers Morgan makes these emotional arguments often. He did it the first time that he met Ben Shapiro. And I find it disgusting. And I think that it's beneath him. And that's all I have to say about that.
There's a moral inconsistency because that's the Ukrainian position. Why the hell should they give up even 1 inch of their land to this murderous dictator?
The point that I'm making here is that I totally agree with Ukrainians who say they don't want to give up 1 inch of land. I'm just not sure that America has to agree with Ukrainians that what's in America's best interest is not for the Ukrainians to give up 1 inch.
Well, only if America cares about freedom and democracy and saving a sovereign country from being taken over by a Russian dictator.
Well, I mean, they've been saved. Meaning, Ukraine.
Also, you're in it.
Prior to this,
you've already committed $110 billion to this, right? So
yes.
You just say, okay, well, we're just going to write that off and give up.
Ukraine can't defend itself. Okay. The reason why they have to give up land to Vladimir Zelensky is because they are incapable of keeping that land against a tyrant. Now, I'm happy to support them, and they require support from the United States. But to say that to ask why they should give up a single inch of land, well, because they can't hold it, and that's a huge deal. Freedom and democracy would also be best served by preserving the world. Okay, there would be no freedom, there would be no democracy, there would be no human rights if nuclear war wiped off all the humans off of the planet. So It's one thing to say, yeah, let's support Ukraine. They need help. And we're getting a good return on our investment. We're getting $2 of damage for every $1 we spend. But to say that if we have to support Ukraine, if we care about freedom and democracy is patently absurd, because there is no freedom, there is no democracy if nuclear weapons wipe out our species. I think that's a majority of everything I wanted to cover with this video. There's some more of the same for the next, 3 minutes of that segment of the Piers Morgan interview with Ben Shapiro. I'll leave a link in the description to the video. It's really good, and I think that you should go and see it. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is that things seem really dire, but there's always hope for the future. There's always hope for wars to end. There's always hope for life to get a little easier, a little better. And the last thing I want to leave you with is the importance for praying for your enemies. I kind of apply a story that is fictional, but I imagine a Russian captain who's out of supplies, and he's going into the forest to pray about whether or not to surrender to the Ukrainians. And he hears a group of Ukrainians talking about how they're excited to kill the Russians tomorrow, and that they're not going to give them any quarter. And then that freaks out the Russian commander without any supplies, and he goes deeper into the forest. And then he hears another Ukrainian commander praying for the Russian soldiers and praying for their safety. And I know for a fact that if that Russian soldier didn't hear the second Ukrainian commander, that he would have fought to the death even though he didn't have any supplies. But if he heard if he heard his enemy praying for his safety, then he would be willing to surrender to them. And I think that we should treat our enemies the same way, that we should pray for them so that they know that they can have a peaceful resolution with us. I'm grateful that you took this time to watch, that you got this far. Leave a comment about what you disagree with any of the points I made. Leave a like, leave a dislike, and subscribe if you want to catch more. I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you so much.